Hi, Bjorn.
Hello.
Nice to see you. So there's about 15, 16 of us here in person, and then how many online? That's like 12 or so online. So about 27, 28 of us, Bjorn. Welcome to Forever Sabah. I'll let you say more where you are right now. I don't have
quite
a good
jealous.
sense
It's
of where.
nice and warm over there.
More on the hot end. So I've given you some indication of who Bjorn is, and he is also in the flyer that you all received. But I think the best person to talk about him is him. He founded something called Edible Garden City, playing on the term that Singapore calls itself, which is Garden City. And he says, well, it needs to be edible. So in terms of systems thinking and what we've been talking about, clearly he wanted to intervene in the food system, the food sovereignty system. It's a little bit complex in Singapore because it's this little island with a huge population and not a lot of land for planting food. Anyway, we'll hear from Bjorn. Can I hand over to you? Tell us about yourself, why food, why Edible Garden City?
So, good afternoon, everyone. A little bit jealous that you're all nice and warm. I'm quite cold now, but because I'm based in Australia, Victoria, I'm facing a mountain as well, which you guys are as well. So I think that there's something of some commonality. So my name is Bjorn. I am the co-founder of Edible Garden City, which is a social enterprise working in the urban farming space. And it's a long journey. It's almost been about 12 years since I left my old life as a marketing person, and wanting to change my life to something a bit more self-sustainable. I went to work on different farms just to learn how to grow my own food. And this journey took me to agriculture school. And the intention was to start a farm somewhere, not in Singapore. But somehow or another, I felt that there was a need to kind of translate what I've experienced in a different space, in a different market, and going back to Singapore to bring those experiences and adapting it to Singapore, which is a totally different environment, space, and political structure. And I guess Singapore is we are quite close neighbors, so you know probably quite a bit about Singapore. It is a tiny island, and food is very very limited, or agriculture has been very limited in the space of Singapore. If you look into the past, actually in the 60s and the 70s, we were doing not too bad in terms of agriculture. We are actually also exporting some of the produce. But at that time, we had 20,000 farms on 25% of our land. This was at the time to feed 1.6 million people. So the equation was a little bit more balanced. But of course, Singapore of today, where it's largely industrialized, with manufacturing, biotech, and also financial services at its core of its economy. A lot of the housing areas or districts have been redeveloped. So a lot of pig farms were seen as a disamenity um, to development. So they were phased out, and a lot of these farmers had to either give up their work to become to go into other industries or to go out and get jobs. And so today only 1% of our land is under cultivation, which is 700 hectares. Now this 1% of our land under cultivation, not all of it is dedicated to food production also, right? So there are industries like ornamental fish, orchids, other horticulture pursuits and plants. So actually the actual food production capacity is much smaller than that. Um, we think that we produce 10% of our food in Singapore. That's what the stats are saying. But apparently, other interest groups around the world have been studying Singapore as a model, and they reckon that only 3% of our food is produced locally. So I don't know who is telling a lie somewhere or another, a bit lost in translation, but 3% sounds a lot worse than 10%. So one of the strategy that the the government has done on food security is actually diversifying their import sources from 170 countries. I think this is a strategy of ensuring that if our friends in Malaysia decides that they don't want to send us any food, hopefully Indonesia would send us some. So it's really diversifying the risks on geopolitical challenges or any other issues. Okay, so lots of imports. Of course, Malaysia is one of the big supplier of um, agricultural products into Singapore, and a lot of this strategy to diversify imports. We tend to do it on securing our food um, system, but what we tend to forget is that these food demands are actually causing um, damage to ecology in our neighboring countries. This example, this picture, I don't know if you can recognize it, but it's in the highlands of Cameron Highlands in Peninsular Malaysia. Um, the production of leafy vegetables, which are cold weather leafy vegetables like brassicas, which are typically eaten by the majority of Chinese population in Singapore, is driving actually very unsustainable farming practices in this space. And you can see the ecological damage, for example, landslides, water table pollution through excessive use of pesticides, and the greenhousing of approach to farming is causing that kind of damage. So as consumers, we feel perhaps there is a whole environmental ethics that we need to consider due to our excessive demand for food. Um, if we look back into Singapore and how we have structured politically since post-independence from the British, we have used greening or urban greening as a political tool to attract foreign investment. At that stage, Lee Kuan Yew, when he was designing modern day Singapore, he said that if we were to organize ourselves and keep our landscape pristine and beautiful, it shows very efficient and good governance, a good government that will then translate to foreign direct investment into the city. So the whole Garden City kind of approach was built on neoliberal policies and economic policies. And today, that has translated into a very green and beautiful Singapore because the policies are set in a way that every developer is developing a building or a development has to replace the amount of built-up space with greenery. So the Urban Redevelopment Authority has come out with this scheme called Landscape Replacement Area. There are green roof policies. There are, so it's very supportive for this entire area. So recently, what has happened is they have started to address the need for food production to be in the urban setting, and so they have slowly tweaked those policies to create a environment that is quite conducive for this next phase of urban greening. But what this has done actually, on hindsight, is that um, there have been quite a number of challenges around this urban greening agenda. And that is kind of building a disconnection between the people and greenery. So me growing up in Singapore, there has always been a disconnect between me and the environment, because I was brought up in a in a garden city, and every day I see trees and plants, beautifully landscaped, a lot of times managed and addressed and maintained by um, cheap foreign cheap foreign workers, because not no Singaporeans will go toil the soil and maintain the landscape. So it builds a strong disconnect between the people and its environment. I wanted to share this video. I hope you can hear the video. And it's Sammy. So she's a young Singaporean, and this is what she shares.
Because I remember when I was a kid, or when I was younger, I went to Nepal and I saw my friends like plucking fruits from the trees, and then I told them, "Are you sure like police is not going to catch you?" And I always share this example to kind of talk about how Singapore is so green, but we just don't have that relationship with nature. And I think food is really like the most easy way to begin conversations and to get people thinking. Like I mentioned, I don't think it's only about growing, it's really about the entire food system. It's about talking about food waste. It's also talking about our relationship with nature, living things, not even just plants, but also perhaps animals as well. So yeah, I do see that so far, like in terms of getting as many people on board, when you say there's food, whether you're growing it or we're eating it, I think that food is like a really, really good way to get people to learn. Making it very personal is also often cultural, but then it also gets people to come together and share their different perspectives when we're talking about bigger structural issues like food justice, food systems, and sustainability. I don't really, because I remember.
So from that, you can sort of hear that this general disconnect between Singaporeans and its environment and landscape. If we go and look at sort of policies around the world in terms of urban food production, it is interesting to see that a lot of the developed nations that are quite agriculture dominant, having agriculture as one of the main GDP driver, also have very strong and robust urban food policies. It is interesting to note that whilst they don't essentially have a food security challenge, they still kind of have anchored themselves on strong urban food policies, and this the challenges in these nations is that the peri-urban encroachment of development is actually eating away. Sort of urban development is eating away at farmland, so the peri-urban farmland. So actually integrating urban farms into the city is a solution for the future. So what we've done, I guess, in the last 8 to 9 years was to bring this idea of urban greening with a purpose, by using farms, urban farms, through three very simple philosophy of values, right? So sustainability, environmental impact, and community engagement. So these three values guide us in how we design the spaces, how we design the programs, and how we kind of engage policymakers as well. But a lot of the philosophies that we have developed or at least adapted are age-old philosophies. Whether it's from Europe or in Asia, there are also a baseline of practices in the past. But if you look at some of the evolution of the thought around the idea of regenerative agriculture and farming in a natural manner, this timeline of Girton all the way to Rudolf Steiner to Sir Albert Howard Marx, Lady E. Balfour, Rachel Carson, and Bill Mollison are very Western centric, but it actually created global movements like the organic food movement, the biodynamic agriculture movement, food foresting. But again, these philosophies were also adapted from indigenous practices or what we call autochthonous food practices around the region. Some of it was adapted through South Asia, some were adapted from Japan. So these philosophies were not what I call it owned by anyone. What we are seeing now, post-millennium theories, is again the same thing, right? Is whether it's using cow horns and cow manure as a ritualized manner to fertilize your land, to take new concepts like syntropic agriculture techniques, or alley cropping. So these ideas are kind of reinvented and then reapplied in the environment that is suited. So what we have done is take some of these philosophies and ideas and try and readapt them into Singapore and a space that is very constrained with both uh, requirements and also the limit of space. So one of that we've been using is of course the permaculture methodology of food foresting. If you live in a tropical environment, if you leave a piece of land empty and you leave it to the devices of nature, it will turn into a forest quite quickly. It's just nature's way of sort of colonizing back space. So the approach here is that if we are able to carefully curate, carefully guide nature in a certain way, we will be able to create a food producing forest that is very little input and very little work. And over the last 8 years, we have developed quite a compendium of different plants in the canopy layers. We have adapted tropical centric plants, for example, like the Suriname cherry, which is from Africa but grows on the tropical belt, and adapted that into Singapore. We have taken things like red leaf hibiscus, more interesting plants like the Mexican tarragon, and put that into how we design our food forests, even climbers, different types of climbers, and it's important why we require diversity of choices of plants, because for where we are at, I think aesthetics play a big part of how we design spaces. There is a very set mindset of how a landscape should look like, and we are able to curate a planting palette of various colors and flowers and exposure and height and structure, so that is easily acceptable by the authorities, by the developers, as something easier for them to understand. And you start to see that when we start using natural approaches to create these sustainable food systems. For example, this example is when we started building this rooftop farm. We actually put in legumes, so beans, to naturally fertilize the soil, instead of adding a lot of inputs from that's imported. We grew the fertilizer on site, green manuring, and you see this similar example on a rooftop in Orchard Road as well. So what this does is actually fix nitrogen into the soil naturally. We dig it in and then we start to plant the main crop. And you start to see that using these philosophies, this framework of thought and how we approach it, you start to see places exploding and thriving and biodiversity returning. And this allowed us to open up new spaces such as rooftops, rooftop car parks, and we started to then look a bit further into what are the other underutilized spaces available for us to activate. So this was an experiment done under a viaduct where we did some indoor growing. Um, and we also sort of started to dabble around with what about spaces with no light, because there's a lot of that in Singapore. I think buildings are normally designed to um, allow minimal light in because it reduces heat. So in this shop house we were able to test a very low cost system of indoor farming. But what really we were able to achieve with this space was we created a community space where people that are interested in the food system could come together and talk about the future of how they like to see the food system. And we curated programs, we hacked the food system, we took Soylent and, did funny things with it. We had talks about how to use fire to cook. We had foraging tours that came out from there right in the middle of the city. And so it was a real exchange of ideas, energy. And from this experiment, we actually created additional movements, right? So people with like-minded people got together, they started other NGO type um, organizations out of this platform. And we started to see that a lot of the spaces that we were managing in the city became a environmental touch point or a touch point for environmental messaging, because we were able to then share ideas like composting, ideas like growing native food, ideas of what is possible to be grown in Singapore. But the challenge really is not about whether we'll be able to grow enough food or not. I think the challenge is always in most cities is the disconnect between people living in a city and nature and agriculture. And I think the problem is a lot stronger in Singapore because agriculture is on 1% of our land. So people are just not generally in tune with what's growing. And we start to see that grow a lot, and really touching schools and the educational system, working with children a lot because we have to start them young, and really you start to see that evolution of I guess environmental responsibility and environmental stewardship start to build from that early stage. And we have continued to do work in this space. Um, one of the one of the sort of main drivers behind how we design spaces like that is how do we further make social impact. We are using our farms, so the employment and access to adults with um, mental challenges or special needs is one of the big parts of our work. And we're currently looking at how do we extend this into the other groups of beneficiary groups, so sort of like elderly. So over the last 8 years, we have built about 243 of these gardens. We have a food production space of 31,000 square feet, and about 222 schools and organizations. We have gone through our volunteering workshops and things like that, and I mean, accumulatively, it seems like there is quite a bit happening. But what we did actually in the last 4 years was something quite unique and quite new, which I will share now. And this is actually was something that kind of came on the back end of speaking to the government a little bit more. I think I always try and avoid the government quite a bit when we first started because it was a tricky situation, right? Urban food production. they could shut us down quite easily. But they were really open when they came to us and asked us what do we need. And we said we really needed a space, permanent space to kind of experiment with systems and things like that. So collectively, we identified a space, 8,000 square meters, and this is 10 minutes from the CBD of Singapore. It used to be a ex-prison, remand prison, and we went in to see what we could do. So we named it Citizen Farm as a basis of getting everyone to participate in the food production system. So the Citizens Farm. And one of the things that we wanted to look at a little bit more closely was the idea of food waste. It seems like there is no short of food currently in the world. It's just that food is not getting to where it needs to get to. And what Singapore does is, because of the spending power, a lot of food comes to Singapore, but a lot get thrown away as well. Every year we throw away 700,000 tons of food, whether through end users or whether it's through the supply chain. One of this initiative was to look at how can we convert that food waste into fertility that can go back into our farming systems. So using the black soldier fly as one of the anchoring operations on the farm, we're able to kind of clear up about 7 tons of food waste per week, turn that into organic fertilizer, and that the insect fresh is then fed back into our soil-based farming system. And today the farm produces about 20-30 different kinds of microgreens, edible flowers, that is then sent to about 70 restaurants in Singapore. And we have a consumer box scheme as well. It's a community-supported agriculture box scheme. The reason why we chose to go this route is because we really wanted to test the concept of whether Singaporeans are ready to really join with the farmers to pay a subscription fee upfront, get a box of vegetables that they can't choose what comes, and really kind of commit to the farmers. And at the start, it was quite difficult. I think a lot of expats understood the concept, so they participated in it. But over time, in the last few years, we've seen a greater growth in Singaporeans signing up for the box. I have a second video, and gives you a kind of feeling of Citizen Farm.
Tuesdays and Thursdays are our typical harvest days. We will just harvest our edible flowers and microgreens for restaurants and bars that order from us. Citizen Farm is like an urban farm located at Queenstown. We chose Queenstown because it's like a kind of a central area, quite close to the city. We're trying to incorporate the urban farm and community together.
It's an urban farming concept that we're trying to develop in Singapore because Singapore has a very big disconnect to food. 90% of our food comes from all over the world. We are spearheading this entire effort to understand what is the relationship between urban cities and food.
We have roughly 20 to 30 different varieties of microgreens and garden edible flowers and herbs that we grow. We have things like the Mexican tarragon, our ulam raja, our snakeweed flowers. We have herbs as well, things like mint, lemon balm. We have basil also. We collaborate together with Insecta, which is the first black soldier fly farm in Singapore. Okay, so first we'll collect soybean pulp and beer waste from around Singapore, and then Insecta will use their black soldier fly larvae to break down the stuff. Their byproduct is like a fertilizer for our gardens, and then they themselves, the larvae, can act as a kind of a food product for things like chicken, birds, fishes. So it's like a kind of like a closed loop. everything that we use and the waste that we produce are still being used back in the garden. So that's essentially what a closed loop is. We don't necessarily have to discard all our garden waste. Sometimes volunteers can come down on Saturdays to do gardening together with us. Because how you learn is through experience. So I mean, if you come down and garden with us, then you'll learn some tips and tricks in the business.
Dirt and soil is not something I'm comfortable with, so it was out of my comfort zone, but also something that deeply interests me because I want to learn how to be sustainable in a place whereby we are having so much food waste and so much chemically produced foods that is not necessarily healthy for us. It was quite dirty work, but I guess it would be rewarding after the compost is done after 2-3 weeks. I actually tried to compost at home, but because of the land scarce environment that we have in Singapore, it's really hard. So it's really beneficial for Singapore to have these kind of urban farms.
Well, I was just actually Googling on the internet and I come across this urban farming. I tried to grow these, the pomegranate, trees. So it grows very well, and then after that it just dies off. So I really don't know why it just dies off. So that's why I thought that maybe coming these kind of sessions here and learn from the farmer here, it helps how to maintain the plants. Well, I think the best part is you see the thing actually growing, and then after that it becomes a full-grown tree, and the thing grows so well. So it's your labor that you put inside, and then you see that it's actually doing very well. So the satisfaction is there. Yeah, I just met 3 guys. 2 guys from the NUS, and then 1 girl who just came back from the States. So it's the first time also for them to come here. I think it's quite good, you meet people sociable also.
I have met a lot of new people here, so I've made a couple of friends as well. They have the same interests as me, so that is really amazing. So it's a very mutually beneficial relationship. We get to learn from each other.
The volunteers that come by, everyone's like, oh, I didn't know this can be eaten. Every volunteer that has come here, they all seem to me to have learned something. They seem to have a takeaway. Yeah, so it's quite nice. Because I started as a volunteer myself, coming here it just led me to realize that food production is something that is very tedious, that you're lucky enough to just enjoy the fruits of the labor. What we do is mostly an experiment, so I think this is something that we're still developing and we hope to be able to make it flourish in the future.
Okay, so that was a little bit of introduction to Citizen Farm. We renamed it again this year back to Edible Garden City. It's a bad habit of mine to keep creating new brands, so better to align everything at once. But what we were planning to do with what we have learned over the last 4 years operating the space is that were we able to kind of consolidate the learnings of this closed loop system and kind of put it in a way, scale it into all parts of Singapore to make Singapore more self-sustainable, food sustainable. And one of this idea was that just using stack container systems to actually get some of the seedlings produced, deal with food waste, turn it into fertilizer so that it can seed other community gardens and farms around Singapore. And I think just purely on numbers, we calculated the amount of available space that were government linked. With about 6,000 of these units, we can maybe be self-sufficient in leafy green vegetables and reduce 26% of food waste, create 11,500 jobs for beneficiaries. So it's kind of a dream that we are working to, almost a pipe dream, but we are still trying to figure out just the intricacies of running that stack system. And this kind of trying to address the food security challenge is now been recognized by the government as a necessity and a requirement. In the last last 3 years, they have actually formed a new agency called the Singapore Food Agency, looking into food production in Singapore. And this then kind of creates a mandate that they have set a target to produce 30% of Singapore's nutritional needs by 2030. So these kind of strong shifts, already with the government on board, we feel that perhaps it's something that we needed to look at to look at the viability of urban farms for the future. And we look back at really what the vision was to create social change through community-centric agriculture. And the number of spaces that we are at seems very fragmented. We are all over the place, and our impact and community is quite diverse, right? And what we do is quite, so sort of a little bit like jack of all trades, master of none, where we're trying to do everything. We are trying to make impact in every space, and this can be quite not unfocused, and we thought we needed to really focus. And what we have found over the last 3 years of experimenting with this concept called horticulture therapy, and working with the elderly, actually allowed us to look at one focus, which is how do we pivot our urban farms into what we call urban care farms. So these farms will not only produce food, but also address shifting needs of the community, which is aging and mental wellness and mental health within the city. The challenge is that Singapore is rapidly aging, is catching up with Japan. I mean, Japan is leading the way, of course, with aging. And just alone in Singapore, loneliness and social isolation causes a majority of the health issues within the population. Dementia is rising, although still manageable. We start to see that actually there is a need to use urban agriculture as a basis of providing some of these intervention services and care. And we have seen that using the farm as a place of activity, of work, of volunteerism for the elderly and other beneficiary groups. We have seen scientific evidence that have been published already that it has the ability to reduce stress markers within the body. If you look into this this journal article, it says that there is a evidence that it reduced plasma IL-6 levels, and these plasma IL-6 level actually causes inflammation in the body, which is then associated to things like depression, dementia, rheumatoid arthritis, and cancer. So again, there is evidence there, and we've been working to further this research with other research institutions to ensure that we are able to adapt this to the farm and to provide more impact to the community. And we're looking at how we have to redesign a lot of our spaces to ensure accessibility, to ensure that it's dementia friendly. We use plants and herbs to evoke the senses, also for sensorial memory recalls. A lot of the elderly population and generation used to grow up in kampongs, right? So where there are farms, there are chickens. So bringing these back can help with them to engage mentally, to recall some of their childhood memories, and that is actually very therapeutic for them. And what some of the projects that we have done in the past was to go into low income housing in Singapore, where elderly males were socially isolated. These rental flats are all dotted all around Singapore, creating a community garden where we brought down elderly males as part of that community. And we started to see in a short 6 weeks program that we run, you could see very clearly the contrast when they first started on week 1, where some of the more depressed participants by end of week 6, they cannot stop talking. So they didn't talk at week 1, they couldn't stop talking at week 6. So that was a very quick transformation we see within a 6 weeks period, and the community bonding and kind of thing that came out from it was also quite invaluable. So what we're working on right now is to create with the National University Healthcare System to create this concept called the health district. In a way, we move from urban food production and try to change the system there, and now trying to use urban farming to change the healthcare system. We're trying to use urban farms as a source of medical intervention for housing districts of the future, in a way that if the farms can provide some form of activity, some form of pay, the elderly can be productive for longer, so productive longevity. They are less likely to be socially isolated, thus less likely to fall sick, thus less likely to stress the medical infrastructure, which is very limited at this point, right, for the growing elderly population. So this is a real pivot, but also for urban farm, instead of just producing food as a source of revenue, we are also then able to garner additional revenue streams from a whole different industry, but using urban farm as that vehicle. So this is, in a way, I would think, trying to change another system with urban agriculture. But really, as you see in the videos before, the future leaders of our space, it's not me anymore, will be the new younger individuals, and a lot of them have started to form some level of social and environmental responsibility. I wanted to share this last video with you, and this is Kim.
Hi, I'm Kim, and I gave up a potential corporate career to be an urban farmer. I first started thinking about farming when I was doing my study abroad in the Indian Himalayas. In my half a year there, we went to a lot of village homestays. We also met many agricultural NGOs. The more you spoke to different people, listened to their stories, the more you realize that, hey, their stories are so interesting, it's so fascinating. So when I came back, I decided to restart my college's urban farm with a friend of mine, partly because I needed an outlet for all my stress. I had like pimples breaking out all over my face. It was so ugly. Life in the mountains was extremely stress-free. It made me think a lot about why life in Singapore wasn't that way. After I graduated, I applied to a lot of companies, like big corporate companies that had sustainability departments, but I ended up choosing to work for Edible Garden City. When I told my parents about my job offer, they didn't react too well. They said things like, oh, okay, how much are they paying you? Are you looking at other things? Are you looking at other jobs? They felt that I was working for Edible Garden City just because I wanted to bum around. There was once when my mom and dad were washing the dishes in the kitchen, and I overheard them saying, Kim has life too good. That's why she doesn't understand how difficult it is to make money. So I got really hurt. I burst into the kitchen and I just told them, it's precisely because we have life too good right now that we should start looking out for others. I feel very strongly about climate change. I feel very strongly about saving the environment. I feel that I should try to live as much as possible in a way that promotes sustainable living and sustainable development. It took us many fights and tears and screaming competition. But ultimately we agreed to disagree, and I know they come from a place of love and concern. In fact, I'm so grateful for them. They haven't kicked me out of the house yet, so I know they still love me. I am extremely aware that to be able to work here is a sign of privilege. And it's not that I don't think about money. I do think about money. I just maybe think about money in a very different way. Money is a tool for us to do things. Buying a house, talking about BTOs, having a car, there's nothing wrong with that. But people often forget that it's not the only way of living life. It took me a huge emotional leap of faith to stay in Edible Garden City. Honestly, I thought that I was just going to be here for 3 months. But I started asking myself questions like, what other jobs out there would be aligned with my values? I think at the end of the day, you shouldn't be afraid of what other people think and just do your own thing. The moment you start worrying about what other people think, it inhibits a lot of what your potential could be. It's very difficult to go against the flow, but I don't see how I could do it any other way.
Okay, so I've come to the end. I want to share a quote with everyone, which is from Masanobu Fukuoka. The ultimate goal of farming is not the growing of crops, but the cultivation and perfection of human beings. And urban farming really embodies this, and you can see that it's really the people that is what we are trying to cultivate. And so thank you for your time, and thank you for listening.
Yay! Hear everyone clapping. Thank you, Bjorn. That was beautiful. I hadn't heard the latest of what you're doing, but amazing to see all these young people and changing their career tracks to join you. You okay for some questions and a little bit of chat?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Got some reflections also in the context of what we've been talking about, systems thinking, systems change, modules that we learned from today. So we used Ashoka's crash course, Bjorn, that I think you've done yourself. The 5 R's and direct impact, indirect impact, all these things. So if you want to speak a little bit to that as well, it'd be great to hear.
Yeah, I guess I can speak about a little bit about system change and that kind of stuff. I never understood what system change was until Ashoka, and I always kind of approached it on trying to solve that bigger challenge, and it's kind of a progression of my journey as well. I started with trying to solve smaller problems and issues that I see, and as you can see, it has changed over time as well. It has evolved over time as well, on how we have pivoted from food possibly to healthcare for the future, and then how do we then adapt that even further. So I think the whole system change kind of thinking methodology has really helped me see it clearer, and help me understand that there's this way of thinking, and so that has also helped us put together a strategy for this pivot to the healthcare space as well. Yeah, so that's a little bit about my system thinking approach, which is not very elaborate. Sorry.
I don't think it has to be elaborate, because I think you did approach it, from a systems perspective to begin with, and you're just, it's now expanding and deepening, because it is. I think as long as you're addressing something in a systemic way, it is a lifelong thing.
How did you actually make that pivot? I mean, not make the pivot, but how did you come up with the realization that was the pivot you wanted to make? I mean, did it come at an intuitive, emotional level, intellectual level, both, or funding, politics? Where did it come from?
Yeah, I think it came from a multitude of drivers and levers, right? So we were already working on horticulture therapy type programs as part of a study by the National Parks Board. And while facilitating these, we then saw the evidence, and it's like it's great, that this has the potential to really impact communities. And also when the business evolved, when we started to set up production sites, like at Citizen Farm, um, we started to realize that the challenge of producing food en masse in a very small given footprint sort of points really to the entire food supply chain and food system challenge of trying to achieve economies of scale. And just if you were just basing an urban farm producing purely leafy vegetables for sale to the community or to shops or customers, it is quite hard to survive financially. And if you were to go vertical and to put technology in it, the quantum for investment is really high. So we really had to rethink how we approach, how we design business models around urban farming. And this pivot was also on the stance of financial viability and sustainability for the future. So there are many multiple factors. I don't think it's one. I think sometimes scientific evidence comes is great, but sometimes you can't fit it in. It's not going to go anywhere. So it's really for us a repositioning out of survivability, and for the ability for us to then sort of set a model that we can open source to other urban farms that are now sprouting up all around Singapore.
If not, I have one. I always think about Singapore as, a very cosmopolitan, very globally sophisticated country, and I think your urban elite like to have their food from wherever in the world. How is this for them? We were just learning about mindset change and framework change. I think it would be a major mindset change for the urban elite to say that their particular sayur came from that rooftop, because it didn't come from somewhere fancy in the world.
Yeah, I think this is also riding off the global sort of shift to local food, local agriculture. A lot of the early days where we started building gardens for restaurants and chefs, that there was a resurgence of chefs wanting to go more local to support local agriculture. So it became then over time that it was um, almost a fashion to support local agriculture. It is still today, but that is almost always quicker for the elites to tap onto these global trends than for the rest of the population, because they are more price sensitive, right? So things that we grow in the city, unfortunately, it's more expensive because of operational costs and whatnot. Um, so so I think for them is that we are introducing a lot of the native type food that can grow well in Singapore, but it's not really eaten anymore, um, through things that they can understand. So we push it through Michelin star chef to try and convert that into a dish where they will feel that there's some prestige in this. So in a way, then slowly that will filter down into sort of mindset shift, when people start to demand it, more people are growing it. In a way, if we are all eating sayur manis instead of kale that is imported, or lettuces that are imported, perhaps that will change, the way that agriculture is being carried out in our neighboring countries, which are growing quite unsustainably to feed Singapore. Because with Science, you don't have to put crop protection, you don't have to put greenhouses on it. You can really approach it in a food forest way. You can approach it in a regenerative food way, agriculture way. So there's semblance in this. Sometimes you need them. So if we are able to shift the mindset for the elites, then that will potentially in the future filter down into more common practice. And we're also working on another route up from the community, where using the herbs that they grow and finding some value in that for just daily self-care and things like that. So that has quite a good following as well. So yeah, it is hard. I think mindset shifts is the hardest to change. But I think as the global scene and the narrative changes with agriculture, slowly it will shift, as well.
Okay, I'm online. Thank you for giving us a very nice, what's the story so far in Singapore. I'm always very curious to learn about roof gardening, roof farming in Singapore. I've not been to Singapore for some time. I just would like to ask, do you face any problem, like for example, if you bring soil to the building top and then the roof manager, the building manager complains saying that there's no waterproofing, you shouldn't put soil on top, and like all kinds of macam, because I know in Singapore the building rules are quite tight, and what kind of physical challenges do you face when you do urban farming? Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Casey. Definitely, I've 101 challenges for rooftop farming. I mean, rooftop is not the most ideal place for farming, because it's the accessibility of rooftops can be quite harsh environments. There are microclimates in their own, wind tunnels, very hot. And so yeah, there are many challenges, but if you look at how Singapore's development policies around greening has been laid out, a lot of the rooftops now have gardens on them, right? So they are already built with soil and ornamental plants on them, and these are rooftops that are easily converted to urban farms because infrastructure is in place. The challenge then is with the older rooftops, because accessibility can be an issue. They may not have enough loading capacity to put soil on, and also like you mentioned, waterproofing and things like that. So for these kind of inaccessible rooftops, is better to we tend to kind of shift our focus to things that are a bit lower hanging fruits to convert. And but these days they have been putting vertical hydroponic systems on rooftops and all of that. So again, you can always find ways around these things, and also because of Singapore's mandate of producing 30% more food by 2030. It's also all the developers are kind of on board as well. So they are trying to open up spaces, underutilized spaces for urban farming and things like that. So they tend to work together to try and solve these access issues and disamenity issues as well. Yeah.
So if for example there's a scenario, you're very experienced in Singapore and then you come over to Kota Kinabalu and you try to start this trend of urban farming and things like that, what is the single most powerful story or narrative that you can advise us to communicate so that people will catch on the idea? because you know lah, I mean, many times there are many things, good things in globally done, but you know, in urban population, they need a narrative to kind of like motivate them to do it. Well, what do you think, based on your experience in Singapore, what is the narrative you feel is the most powerful to communicate in our, probably our Facebook, our website, and when we give talks to people, what kind of story or narrative you feel can help?
So of course, Singapore is quite a unique case because of all the factors, right? We import 90% of our food, etc., etc. The greening policies set it up in such a way that we were able to put this model in place. But what we have seen actually globally, the role urban farm plays from city to city can be quite different. So, for example, in Korea, which has a big urban farming movement, it's not necessarily used for food production as a business, very much used as a community engagement tool and citizen participation tool. Well, also the urban farms there serves as a touch point between rural and urban setting. So, for example, a rooftop farm in the middle of Seoul actually brings in rural farmers to give talks in the urban setting. So to teach people about where their food comes from, how to grow them, their experiences. And so much so, this whole notion globally that's happening on reverse migration, right? In the past, people are moving from the rural areas into the urban areas to look for work. You've seen during COVID, well, in Australia, people from the urban spaces are now moving into the rural areas, looking for places to hide, right, or to live. So the example in Korea and Seoul is that urban farms then become a place of training for urbanites wanting to move back to the rural setting to maybe start a farm, because living in a city, maybe they have never had a connection. So they go to urban farms, they volunteer, they learn. Before they have enough skills, it's like, okay, I'm ready. I'll go back to the rural area to start a farm, right? At least I'm not going in blind and green. So that as a role, I think also urban farms has as a touch point to help rural farmers connect directly to consumers to sell their products, whole farmers market so all those are also important touch points to build that community around. I think the last one I wanted to share, which I think I've spoken to Cynthia quite a bit about, is to maybe showcase some of the indigenous knowledge on plants, food, and medicine, perhaps sort of highlighting, the tribes in Sabah or Sarawak and their deep knowledge of the land, and sort of bringing that into the city so that urbanites can understand that there is a lot more in the tropical environment than just lettuces and bok choy and chai sim and things like that. So yeah, many things you could do, yeah, in KK.
Go for it.
For Bjorn, yeah, thank you so much, Bjorn. What a wonderful work you're doing. Such a yeah, it's admirable what you do, and then it goes out to the older community as well, which I really like. Have you ever thought of taking it to old folks' home and that kind of places?
So we have recently completed two projects. One in Tan Tock Seng Hospital, but that was to target post-trauma patients, so where mostly amputees, and this we work with the OT, the occupational therapist, to deliver the horticulture therapy training, and it was well received in a way that the participants asked after the program that they wanted to take some plants home to continue to grow at home. I think that in itself will allow them to continue that therapeutic journey at home, at least sow that seed in their mind. The other one was that we worked with a special needs school, brought them to the farm. We actually use the animals on the farm, so chickens and things as a therapeutic tool. And that was very well received. I guess from a aspect, in Singapore, we don't really have chickens running around, anymore. So that connection with a living thing like an astral body is quite important. If not, the general consensus or the general mode of approach for Singaporeans when they see wildlife is call the pest control or so those things are quite something that we are trying. So it's and we are in the process of building a care farm for one of the um, elderly care homes. But the strategy then for the future is really dropping these urban care farms into housing estates, because in every housing estates there are elderly care service centers. So it's kind of an extension of programming that we can offer to the elderly care um, activity centers, childcare centers, and all of that. So every estate should have a urban farm, urban care farm. That is the approach.
Someone here, you said that Singapore imports 90% of your food. I assume that your produce would be sold in the, can't see the rest. Can you see the rest?
Yes, I can. Yeah, and it's funny. That was when I started out. I was like, Singapore imports 90% of the food. Um, Whatever I grow, I will be able to sell. There won't be any waste because there's so much demand, right? How wrong was I? I think the food system is a very entrenched system. Uh, Supermarkets have their supply chains already built up. It takes a long time for us to actually inject. I mean, we don't want to go into supermarkets because that is the whole point of it, right? We're trying to change the economic system around food. But just getting our produce out there is hard. We still produce waste on the farm. There's no getting out of that. And because the cost of production for vegetables and on the farm is actually higher than what is being imported. For example, a bunch of kangkong, from Malaysia can cost, $1, but in Singapore is produced for $2, right? So people are still price sensitive when it comes to when they are out marketing and shopping. I think Singapore is not at the stage where the consumers are ready to fully support local food, although there are campaigns now happening to get them to select Singapore produced stuff. But if we tell the auntie or the person marketing saying that you should support local agriculture, pay $1 more, $2 more, they would think, why should I do that when I can save up money to buy a new iPhone, right? So there's always that need and wants, and the support, altruistic support of local food systems that still needs to be ironed out. But we're getting there, I think, but it's a slow mindset shift that needs to happen.
What about the people in the sort of the margins, like our fellow Ashoka fellow Sazad works with migrant workers, the Bangladeshis and who come into Singapore to do certain kinds of work. What is their access like to to healthy food? That makes sense?
Yeah, funny enough, we were talking about this because I think one of the big peeve point of mine is that we have actually a lot of food growing naturally in our urban landscape, right? It's whether you can identify them or not. And of course, a lot of our foreign migrant worker friends are very well versed, right, with these things because these are things that they eat. For example, they can identify a moringa tree from a mile away because that's their kind of staple and they love to eat that. So the pet peeve I have is that the government has then instituted a policy saying that you cannot pick from state land, right? Even though the a fruit tree grows, a durian tree grows, and the durian drop on the floor, you cannot pick that durian up, or not, you'll be fined $50,000 or go to jail, right? As a blanket rule, and they fine foreign domestic workers before for picking, for foraging stuff, and this then limits, their ability to kind of at least engage with the environment and to survive. And so then they are fed with, mass-produced food. I think that is one challenge, but the other challenge is that we do have a food poverty issue in Singapore, not from a sense of you not having things to eat, but I think the nutritional content and compounds in a lot of processed foods, people in the lower socioeconomic class will consume those and not have a choice to consume better quality type stuff. And even in our sort of food centers that you go to where you can get a cheap meal for $2, $3, they are not necessarily the most healthy type of food, right? So I think food poverty comes in different manners and different forms in Singapore, which we still need to dig quite a lot deeper into it. Yeah.
So I have a question about leadership. I saw you have your team seems to be growing. You have a lot of young people, and you also live in Australia. How does this work? Collective leadership, sort of the second generation of leadership. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and your vision? Moving forward in the future.
Yeah, I've always wanted to start a organization that was quite flat in structure. So sort of I looked at cooperative models where everyone would be vested or have a share in the business or the movement or the enterprise, right? So keep it quite flat. That worked in the first 4 to 5 years where we were 10 to 15 people. So it's quite small. We were managing by objectives. It's quite relaxed, and we all had a bit of fun. We all worked hard when we need to. Then when we started to grow and when we started to be more financially dependent on projects and things like that, then this flat structure kind of was a bit harder to institute. I think if we kind of gave it a longer shot and work harder on it, we probably could have made it work. But then we restructured, so then we started to put layers. And now we restructured again last year to simplify it again, but still with the hierarchy in place. And of course, then a lot of the older guys that have been around for a while are saying that, oh, it feels so corporate now. It's like it's like a corporation that is very top down and etc. etc. And it's hard. It's still experiment for us. We don't know how it will finally turn out, but this is what we're going to try and see what's going to happen. And for me, it's I'm not a leader by nature, so I tend to work on the things that I feel I'm good at. I'm not great at people management, so recently we have a new CEO that has really extensive experience managing people, so he has come in to help with dealing with that, while then I can continue to do my research, work on topics to further the food system movement, and to work on collaborations and things like that. So what I try to do a lot is to, when I'm away, this is probably like the longest I've been away because of COVID, is that I send food team updates with sort of values, on things, and really identifying and telling backstories of the journey and where we felt we have done well, where we have not. Sort of reiterating the values again and again so that everyone is on the same page, right? Because some people might think, oh, making money is important. Some people think, oh, we just should work on social impact, but maybe we need to find that balance. So sharing examples and that journey, I think it's really important, and to inspire them in my narrative and my writing to them. This is the least I can do now at this point, and I continue to write updates to them, like, once a month, and share with them what I'm working on, what I'm looking at, just to inspire them that there is a bigger picture that we're working towards. And I think that's as best as I can do in terms of leadership at this point.
Hi, Bjorn. This is Jan. Earlier today, we were going through a module talking about the SMART network with the Ahsoka module. So my question is about your journey, because this was a particular place where I was stuck, where in the center, it's the shared vision and sometimes it's the organization. And when you're talking about engaging external partners, is it something that you have to get them on board to share the vision, or was it something that you had to champion all the way until you had some kind of breakthrough? So from like the very beginning to where you are now, did it change, or what was it like in engaging those partners and the vision?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I guess when I first started, it was because the team was small, so it was easy to share, and we easy to come to consensus on direction that we're headed towards. We were quite organized, loosely organized in a way, but we met up quite often. We did jobs together, and during the time when we are carrying soil or carrying a stone or together, then these ideas will bounce off each other, and there's this camaraderie that happens. So easy to kind of push ideas through, to have a shared vision. Of course, then when it started to grow and when we have 3 different revenue verticals, it started to silo quite a bit, and then it's harder to kind of get everyone on board when we are trying to push a certain direction. So what I would normally do is I will do it first, and then try and get buy-in after. Now it seems like we have set up a leadership team, so we have leaders, and then we'll get the leaders involved in some of the key decisions. But generally, strategic direction is still driven by me and the CEO and one of the strategy leads. So it still feels a bit top down, but we're just trying to include more people as and when the timing is right. I think in the past, what we've or in the last iteration, what happened was that we tried to get everyone's sort of feedback for certain things that we hope to do. Everyone has agenda or point of view, and then in the end, nothing really moves fast enough, right? Sometimes you kind of need to make the decision fast. So yeah, we're taking a different tack now. So it keeps evolving and it keeps changing. I think there is no, I don't have answer for that yet. But we are still experimenting with this approach.
Okay, I think we're kind of ready to shift, but I do have one curiosity, and I think we talked about this when you were here during our retreat, Bjorn, about leadership as a man and a sort of the new male leadership in the world, or the new male leadership that the world needs. And I remember reflecting back to you that I saw you as someone who carries that. I know you always say, you're not a good leader, you're gonna focus on the things that you're good in. But how do we define a good leader? Is it one with charisma? Is it one with authority and etc.? And I'm thinking of the image of the strong male, stereotypical leader as opposed to one that has his hands in the earth and looks at plants and bees and ponders deep questions. Do you want to say a bit about that and your own journey?
Yeah, I took a lot of inspiration during my sort of conversion from corporate to this life through meditation, and philosophies around things like impermanence. I try and adapt a lot of that to how I approach problems and things. And I think one thing comes up time and time again, and it's really to really put empathy into everything that I do. Although I still make a lot of mistakes dealing with my leadership team, but always thinking back and thinking with them from their point of view and being empathetic. I think that's really important, and hopefully more leaders can also use that as a basis of how they manage their teams. And I think the time for authoritarian leadership is over. Yeah, so it needs to be a collective effort to change the way we do things.
Hi, Bjorn. I actually have a question, and my name is Joan. I have a question because earlier we went through a worksheet about growth and delivery models to explore. So based on your journey and the stories that you've told us, I recognized organic growth and some affiliations, but I was just wondering if have you made any plans to disseminate and have your solutions replicated in either a local scale or even internationally?
Yes, that has been, of course, on my mind quite a bit. Singapore is a very small dot on the bigger scheme of things, right? With a small red dot, and the impact, whatever impact we'll make in Singapore is quite limited as well. One of the ways that we felt would be the best, at least, is really to transcribe our learnings in terms of urban planning and city planning, and transcribe that into an open source system, in a way allowing access to any social entrepreneurs in any other cities around the world to adapt those models that they can use then in their own cities. I think the old model of being a McDonald's of urban farming is long gone, right? You can't go into KL and set up edible garden city and then replicate that model and then tell people, oh, this is the way. I think we need to have a way that really empowers the local people to lead this movement, because in the end it is their space, it is their market. And it is the impact for them to make. And what we can do is just to share really our learnings. And a lot of times, not the positive side of the learnings, but where are places or areas that we fall down on and fail. I think that's important to share. I think people don't share failures as much. So for this entire pivot to care farms, that is what we are hoping to do. So really to create that model and open source it. So hopefully that will be adopted by other social entrepreneurs.
Thank you so much, Bjorn, for taking time to spend this afternoon with us. And I'm so very happy personally that you're in the world and continuing to plant, keep the earth fertile. I don't think it matters where on the planet you are. Let's show Bjorn some love, everybody online and here.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day and rest of your exciting journey, change making.
Thank you, Bjorn. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. See you later.
Bye for now.